Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to season two of Conversations in Pop Culture, where I have with me Big Bang Roni Nicole. So, welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited because I think there's been a lot going on with you in the last few years. You've done a lot of interesting stuff. Obviously, I saw you for the first time at Primetime, and then I went backwards, and I loved what you did at Primetime Pro Wrestling and Butch vs. Gore. I guess 1 year anniversary was yesterday, and they got some coming up at
Oh,
the
yeah.
end of the month. But before we get into all of that and all of wrestling, I am super curious how you got into wrestling and what was your first experience with wrestling. And then we're going to talk about how it sort of evolved from there.
Yeah. Big shout out to Butch versus Gore and everybody behind the scenes there. Yes, you're correct. Yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of a truly groundbreaking event that took place at DC Brow. So I wanted to especially thank everybody who was integral in creating that event, and hopefully moving forward we'll get Butch versus Gore too. So that's very exciting, and I'm so glad that you were able to see me there. Next time, make sure you come up and say hello. But yeah, wrestling has always been a passion of mine. It's always been a part of my life, and it was a secret part growing up, just because that wasn't something that was really looked at favorably among my friends and family. But growing into the business and breaking into the business was definitely a journey in and of itself. I originally started in North Carolina, down in Fayetteville, with Nightstick Eddie Brown and Tony Hainchime James. And then I transitioned over to CW Anderson's cousin, who had a training school. And so I trained under CW, Lou Marconi, and Chili Willie from ECW. So I definitely got started with a lot of old school guys down here in the Carolinas, that old AWA, NWA style, a lot of storytelling, definitely focusing on the psychology of wrestling, making sure that my training was up to par. So breaking in, I just had these great group of old school veterans to kind of guide me and lead me into what would be the rest of my career. And once I got in, there was no stopping. I took that first bump. I did it incorrectly, but even though I was in pain and suffering, I was so excited to be in the ring and actually living my dream and doing what I didn't think I was going to be able to do. So I was very blessed and happy when I was able to stumble into wrestling, because that's what happened. I stumbled upon a Craigslist posting where a gentleman was looking for athletic females. At the time, I was semi-professionally cheerleading, so I thought that it was an advertisement for something along those lines, but it turned out he was trying to start an all-females wrestling promotion here in North Carolina. And so from there, he was actually paying for the training and trying to get a core group of girls together to have as his main roster. And as most people know, wrestling is a very challenging business. And if you don't have a good business acumen, it can be very difficult for you to sustain that. And so he didn't really think it all the way through. But I had already, gotten my foot in the door and finally gotten into training. And I was really excited because at that time, when I started training in the early 2010s, there weren't a whole lot of training facilities available. There weren't a lot of places that you could go to get quality training. There weren't a whole lot of places that you could go in order to break into the business. At that time, I didn't know any vets in my area, even though being in North Carolina and being in the Raleigh area, I am surrounded by some veterans. I wasn't aware of them and how to break into the business at that time. And so being in college, it wasn't an option for me at that time of forsaking college to pursue professional wrestling training outside of the state. And so I had to wait. And when I stumbled across this ad, it was the perfect, serendipitous event to bring
Great.
me into the business, and give me that intro that I honestly had no other way of getting. And so I was very excited to start training. We went down to Fayetteville every Saturday, and they ran me through the ringer, just to see what I was able to do. And it was funny because I was the only female who kept returning. Each week he would have a group of girls who would go down, and then it started dropping off to being just me and maybe two other people, to just me and one other person, to just me. And so, going through that process of seeing people come and go, but I was the only one who remained. The guy who was trying to start this promotion, I guess he didn't feel that it was financially, beneficial for him to continue. But at that point, like I said, I'd already caught in the bug. I'd already, developed a strong rapport with Eddie and with Tony, and I was already looking, to start working as soon as I was released to do so. So it was definitely an experience. That was my first brush with a shady promoter, but that's what got me into the business initially. And then unfortunately, I had to stop training with Eddie and Tony, but I was able to move over and start training with CW and Lou and Chili. And, that had definitely yielded some fantastic results. I feel like that just added to the great foundation I had already started with. And they definitely gave me their differing perspectives, but their shared experience, which helped, build me and helped to start my career.
So to even go off of that, because wrestling is divided into two sectors, and even a third one I might even add into that, where there's the physical side of wrestling, which I think to some degree might even be easier than the psychological side of it. And I
Mm.
feel like, and I speak to a lot of wrestlers, and I feel like the psychological side always gets dismissed, understanding, and even how to sell as well, and sell a match and sell in the ring and make it believable, and actually make it look how it's supposed to look. And I think people don't understand that the psychological is not just, the match mentality, but it's also entering the arena a certain way and understanding how to be a heel, how to play to a crowd. And obviously, COVID has changed that a little bit. And hopefully, we'll
Absolutely.
talk about that at the end and more to the back, because I want to talk about more positive things. And but I digress from there. So, what was that like? Because I feel like when you went to CW, that psychological stuff really started to come out more so. Because if anybody who's seen you wrestle, I feel you are more of a psychological wrestler than a physical wrestler. Not saying you can't go, and believe me, you could probably kick my ass back and forth in the ring, but I still feel like you're really more in the psychological element when in your matches. So how did that all come about, and what was that like for you to really learn that and embrace that? That's my opinion on you.
Um, I would say that I do focus on the psychology, but when we're talking about the psychological aspect of wrestling, we're actually talking about two different things. So when you talk about wrestling as a whole, wrestling itself is a physical activity. Wrestling is also a mental activity. And so that's what we're talking about. The wrestling mentality and the psychological effects of being a professional wrestler, being a minority, being of the LGBTQ community, and being Afro Latina. I tick a lot of boxes that don't necessarily and haven't in the past been well received in professional wrestling, which has usually been presented as a cisgendered white male sport. However, the psychological effects of being a professional wrestler are something that are very deep and very encompassing, because it's not just the ring, it's outside of the ring. It is
The
the
lifestyle.
interaction that you have. Right. It's a complete lifestyle. Being a professional wrestler is not a hobby. And if you're doing it as a hobby, that means that is your hobby. Because if you were trying to be a full time professional wrestler, a lot of your time and most of your time is devoted to everything dealing with professional wrestling, whether that's your body, whether that's your character, whether that's your historical knowledge, whether that is your move set, whether that is improving upon that, whether that is brushing up on skills, whether that is marketing yourself, getting to and from to events. There's a lot of things that go into being a professional wrestler that fall under that category of the psychological aspect. But I think what you're talking about
Relationships.
is, yes, absolutely. But I think what you're referring to is more of the psychology and the character work. And yes, I have in later years transitioned, especially here in the States, into a character wrestler. Whereas when I'm in Japan or I'm abroad, I'm focused more on the actual wrestling and the technical aspect of wrestling, less so than the character work, because obviously there's going to be that language barrier there. Obviously, there's going to be a different type
Well,
of
we're going to
story
talk
that you
about
have to
that.
do. Yes.
You
So,
killed it in Japan.
and we'll be killing it again soon. Um, so um, the psychology aspect and what turned me on in terms of using more psychology and character work in wrestling, as opposed to a lot of hard hitting moves and continuous bumps and continuous moves, was just the mentality of I only have so many bumps I can take. Other people only have so many bumps they can take, regardless of how you're trained, regardless of how safe you are. You only have so many times that you can safely take bumps in the ring. You only have so many times that you can have a bad bump that gives you a concussion. You only have so many times where certain parts of your body can continuously be impacted. And so learning how to save all of those high impact, save those bumps, and save that sort of storytelling for bigger arenas, for larger crowds, and honestly, for a payday that could cover me in case something that was bad, God forbid, occurred, is something that I had to learn over time. Initially, starting my career, I did all the physical stuff 100%. My finisher was a leg drop off the top rope. I started doing that onto concrete. My first year in the business, I took on almost a third of my bumps away because I was so busy trying to do these difficult moves and do these over the top things that honestly didn't feed into the story I was trying to tell with my opponent. It just fed into the idea of I have to do this to prove myself. I have to do this because I am a larger woman in the business and I have to show people that I can do things. I have to show them that I am able to take and give. There are different ways of doing that. And unfortunately, some of us who were trained in the early 2010s have the mentality that was of the older time, which isn't bad, but it's definitely different. And definitely now we put more emphasis and more focus on what is the safety of what we do because we've lost so many
Yeah.
people in the ring to just flukes, because we've lost so many people because they were medicating themselves to cover up that they were hurt because they had those horrible matches or those terrible bumps that injured them or maimed them in a way that they, for the rest of their life, they live with this chronic pain. So, growing into wrestling and growing up in wrestling, in the sense of being a professional wrestler, very early, once my body started reacting to the things, the unsafe things that I was doing, I put the kibosh on that because there's no way that I will ever be able to get to WrestleMania if my body does not function at a high enough level to sustain that type of schedule and to sustain what would be asked of me later on. I'm 34 years old. I have to be very aware of what my body is doing because prior to wrestling, semi-pro cheerleading, cheerleader, dancer, I did ice skating. Like I was very physical, color guard, winter guard, um, jazz, hip hop, ballet, point, all of that. My body has always been physically in something. And so coming into professional wrestling, my bump card, so to speak, was already at a lower level because of what had already been done the wear and tear I did as a younger person, the injuries I sustained prior to coming to wrestling. And so for me, focusing more on the character, focusing more on the storytelling, focusing more on grabbing people from that emotional perspective, that is something that I believe is a lost art in wrestling and something that not everybody is able to do. Everybody, as you said, can be trained to be a wrestler. We see it with the larger companies. They pull from all different sorts of industries. They have fitness models, they have athletes, football players, baseball players, basketball players. But it takes a very honed and skilled individual to be able to elicit that emotional response with a limited working arena as well as with a limited amount of moves. Now, you're correct. I could do all the moves in the world. As you saw in my career in Japan, my finisher in Japan is a Canadian destroyer. But that is not necessary all the time. And when I'm trying to tell a story, if it doesn't fit with what I'm telling, then there's no reason for me to add that in. My goal as a professional wrestler and as an entertainer is to always submit to the fans, to give them the experience of being able to escape their reality, of being able to suspend their disbelief and buy into the story that we're telling. Because just like the television that we watch on TV or the movies and the things that we stream and we're so involved in, wrestling is no different. It is a live television show. It's a telenovela, if you will. We're telling that good and evil story and creating it right in front of your eyes. And there are very few industries in entertainment and in sports where that sort of storytelling goes on. Now, you could say that that happens with, football and baseball, but the story that you tell in football and baseball is one team win, one team loses. And yes, that's the same with wrestling. However, the difference is when we invest in wrestling, we're investing in each person in that ring and in the story they're telling us. When you invest in a sporting team, you're not investing in one person, you're investing in that collective. And so for us, it's a greater responsibility as an individual to be able to tell and communicate those stories to our audience and to create and weave a magical experience for them to enjoy for however long that we have in the ring. And I definitely value what we do, and I definitely see how impactful that it can be and how far reaching wrestling is. Every famous TV show has a wrestling episode somewhere. Everybody knows wrestling. Everybody has seen wrestling, but everybody may not want to admit that they like it. They may not want to admit that they know what they know because of the poor stigma, that has taken place in the past. But here, coming into the present and moving forward into the future, it is definitely something that I see that has to be brought back, that storytelling aspect. You know, it's evolved into athletic storytelling for sure. I was in Korakuen for Osprey and Ricochet, and that sort of athletic storytelling is something that is new in the terms of the evolution of professional wrestling and is amazing to see. But not everyone
Yeah.
does it, and not everyone does that at a high level, you know? And so as the wrestling continues to evolve, we will continue to see storytelling manifest in different ways. But in terms of my ring work and what I like to do in the ring, I'm a storyteller. I am sitting around a campfire with you. I'm weaving a tale for you to enjoy. And at the end of that tale, you'll be shocked and awed and left with either happiness or despair, depending on what the finish is. But for me, that's how I envision professional wrestling.
So the way I view wrestling is very different than other people. I'm a big comic book fan, and I love good written comics. One of my
Yes.
favorite comics of all times is The Walking Dead. And The Walking Dead brings you along for 178 issues, which is a lot of issues over the course of about 17 years. And you don't know what's going to happen. As soon as you think A is going to happen, B happens, and then C happens, and then E comes before D, and that sets up an entire circumstance. And so obviously, that's how I view wrestling as a gigantic comic book. And I
Yeah.
think that there are good comic books out there that are told really, really well, and then there's things that are not so well told. And I feel that, unfortunately, in wrestling, we have some great stories that have been told in the last 3 years on both, WWE and AEW and on the indies, but we've also had some horrific stories. And I
Right.
think it is an art. And I think that it takes a certain type of wrestler to do that. And also, who are the wrestlers we remember? We remember the wrestlers like Stone Cold Steve Austin flipping off Vince and that
Yeah.
entire story
Yes.
because guess what? Everybody relates to it, everybody understands it, and everybody realizes that the characters involved are so much bigger than wrestling. It's not about wrestling.
Exactly.
I feel wrestling is the venue to tell the story versus the actual story. And I think that
Yeah.
that's something that wrestling is now starting to adapt to. And I think people want it in many ways as well. And I think
For sure.
that, especially during your later career, you figured that out because I think it does make a difference. Anybody, and not anybody can do it, but a lot of people do high, amazing moves. But I need emotional investment.
Yes. And that is definitely something that I seek to provide because we live in a time where instant gratification is, something that it's been programmed into us to expect. However, there is something to be said about a slow burn. And the perfect example right now that I know everybody can relate to is WandaVision. Everybody was like, what is going on after the first two episodes, right? And then as it progresses and as it goes on, more and more unfolds. And so by the end of the finale, which we hope everyone watched, I'm not going to give any spoilers in case you haven't, but hopefully by the end of it, you understood, why it started out the way that it did and ended the way that it did and why it had to progress in that way. Wrestling storytelling is no different. And it's important to me, especially when I'm in places where there's lack of representation, or I'm in places where they have wrestling deserts, so to speak, like they don't have wrestling or they've never had it before. They certainly haven't seen someone who looks like me. They certainly don't know what there is to know about wrestling, And so it is up to me and my opponent and the referee at that time to create a story and to give it to the audience so that they can understand and they can embrace and they can enjoy and actually have a reason to suspend that disbelief and have a reason to invest. And I think that's a lost art in some ways, is that slow burn, which combats that instant gratification, which we're also conditioned to want and to see. But there's something to be said about the chasing of a belt. There's something to be said about storylines that are drawn out over time. There's something to be said about the journey, and we're all on one, regardless of where you are, what you're doing. Everyone is on their own journey. We've had ups, we've had downs. Sometimes you got to take a pit stop on the side of the road to get it back together. Sometimes you get a ride that takes you faster than you thought you would ever be able to go. We all experience the concept of moving through a road and going to a destination. I don't view wrestling any different. And I think that a lot of people should definitely take heart and harken back to those times where we focused on the story, because it's wonderful and it's fantastic to be that athletic and that precise with the movement. But it's also just as wonderful and fantastic to be precise with your timing, with your character work, with the story that you tell, with how you draw the audience in with your moves and your words and your actions and bring them up, but at the same time, you're able to bring them back down at the appropriate time. That sort of conductorship almost of the story that we could create in the ring is something that is very um, pivotal and primal and beautiful to me. And for me, being able to relay those stories and take someone on a journey is the best part. Because in my experience, very, not very often, wrestlers are remembered for the moves, but they're remembered for what they did. They're remembered for that big event, for that big move, for that storyline, for what they said, for, like you said, Stone Cold flicking off Vince. That was a big, like, oh, this man's going up against the boss. Is he crazy? You know, all of that folds into what I'm talking about, because you're building a story. You're connecting people to an awareness and to a situation that they're not in because they're not in the ring, but they're participating in because they're in the venue. And as professional wrestlers, as sports entertainers, whatever you want to say, I do believe it is our primary job is to take people on a journey, you know, just like Page Master.
I couldn't agree more with that. And I like to be invested. I like long stories. I like understanding that there's a history there, or if it's the first time two people are going at, I want false finishes, and I love everything that happens. And I think Chris Hero said it beautifully. A wrestling match should be like a Shakespeare play. There's an act one, there's an act two, and then all hell breaks loose in act three. And
Yep.
that every good wrestling match is like that. Now, you might not like how Act 3 goes. That's completely okay. You don't have
Right.
to like how Act 3 ends, because not every Shakespeare play ended well,
Right.
okay? But it should be that way. And so, having
Absolutely.
said all that, I do want to talk a little bit about your career before we get into Japan and then the offshoot of Japan, how I label it. I think the best place to start, and I don't think it's a wrestling drought, you could correct me, is what you've done in Queens of Combat. Because I think what you did in Queens of Combat is amazing, and I think that you've had an insane run with it. And obviously, you formed, and I might get the name wrong, the Voluptuous Vixens Wrestling Academy with Jesse K, and then I believe a few other people came into it. Miss Dyslexia, Lexica, Heather Owens came into it as well. So obviously, I did this entire thing for him, because this is also when I went back to sort of the first thing that popped up.
Yes, that was actually started by Zane Riley, a dear friend of mine and a true titan in professional wrestling. But he was our manager and he started the Voluptuous Vixens Academy. Yes, I was one of its inaugural members. Queens of Combat was or is. But when I was working with a tremendous organization, at the time that I was working consistently with them, I was under the tutelage and under the direction of Solo Bolt or Soja Bolt. I don't know if you remember her.
Well,
Um,
Josie.
Yes. So a big shout out to Josie. Love her so much. I don't think that she's doing too much wrestling rise right now because her regular job is amazing and she's like this boss lady, bad bitch. But at the time that I was there, she was my point of contact, and her big thing was making sure that minorities were represented and that we had women of color who were going to be brought into the organization. And so she definitely spearheaded and was an advocate for me to be a part of Zane's group
And even
and
to go
working.
further, and even to go further on that, this was one of the first, I guess, pre-women's revolution companies out there that even
Yes.
settled that. So even to go even more basic than even representation of minorities, I think it is really crucial to recognize that Queens of Combat gave a place for women to wrestle and was like an all women's promotion, and that
Absolutely.
before it was cool, and I hate to label it that way, and before it was mainstream to have
Right.
an all women's promotion. And so I think that's something that Queens of Combat also gave. And also, I think it broke some of the stereotype that saying women don't have to be divas.
Yes,
They could be
for sure.
wrestlers. And,
And that
and
was
I hate to say it that way, and I know how it sounds, but I don't know
no,
how to say it any
that's
other
how it
way.
was characterized. And so you're saying how it was characterized. It was definitely at that time, in the mid to 2010s, early 2010s, mid 2010s. At that time, there were very few all women's organizations. Shimmer and Shine have been the old standard for quite a long time. However, there were very few organizations that existed that catered to women on an independent scale if they weren't a customs company. And so it was really fantastic to see uh, this organization pop up out of the Carolinas, for one, but also to give a voice to women across the industry who did not have a foothold in one of the other two quote unquote major women organizations at that time. Unfortunately, at that time, there was a lot of politicking that went on that required you to do before you were given admission to Shimmer or Shine. Um, I'm not familiar with if those practices have changed at this time. I would hope that they are looking at resumes now. But at that time, it was really hard to get in those organizations. And so having Queens of Combat pop up on the scene and give women another outlet, another place to go, and another opportunity to be seen was tremendous. And now we're in an era where women in wrestling is regular. It's been regular the whole time, but now we're coming into an era where it's more accepted and people understand it and they're expecting it almost to have, women's matches or multiple women's matches or even intergender on the card at this point. So I really have to shout out Queens of Combat and give Josie her props because there was definitely a time where that vacuum was not filled and Queens of Combat definitely stepped in and filled that vacuum, very successfully. There were tremendous women and tremendous talent that came through, Queens at that time. Off the top of my head, like you were saying, Jessie K, Big Swole, Ariel Monroe, um,
Savannah Evans,
Savannah Evans, Taylor Hendricks, the
Solo Darling.
Seahawks, Solo Darling, Willow Nightingale. So there were a lot of really tremendous women coming through the organizations, even back there and at that time. And so I feel very honored and very happy to have been a part of Queens at that time and at that juncture, and to have been a part of that, first kind of group of girls before things kind of changed. And like you said, it became cool, to have women around and to have a women's organization.
Yeah, and I feel that in many ways this was iron sharpening iron. And
Absolutely.
also, a lot of these women were new and they were starting to get good. And then you were starting to get really good. And obviously, we have this entire concept of iron sharpening iron. And obviously, I mean, I'm a big Solo Darling fan. I love Solo and everything she does in the ring. I think she is one of the best wrestlers in the world. I really think so. And I think she can run with almost anybody in
Absolutely.
AEW. And I'm surprised she isn't signed yet to AEW, because the way she can seal your legs, just not just saying that leg day with Solo is not a fun day. But I digress right there. And as well as Big Swole as well as another one that sort of pops. So you get to wrestle these women. So what was that like for you? Because you're still new at this point. This is a promotion that is starting to gain traction. All these women are starting to gain traction. And this is before it was quote unquote cool. And anybody who was watching it 3 years later would be like, oh man, I was an original watching all these women who are arguably some of the best wrestlers in the world. And I've seen their first matches. And obviously, that's just a really cool thing collectively, I think.
For me, it was just another day at the office. I learned I was brought up around a lot of celebrities. I have family who were in the NFL and who were in NBA and did athletic things that brought them around famous people. So from childhood, I was around people who were famous, so to speak. So I've never been starstruck. I'm also not a starstruck person because at the end of the day, we all end up 6 feet under or cremated. There is not one person who gets to escape the end of our lives, and therefore we are all equal in my eyes, and we all deserve respect and dignity as human beings. So I never came into anything entertainment wise with the perception of, oh, I'm getting marked out or I'm so excited. Now, granted, there are people that I've met, and it was so important for me to meet them that absolutely I was taken aback and not sure how to respond. Aja Kong being one of them. I crept around the venue like for 25 minutes, peeping around corners and like spying on her before I actually approached her. But working with these girls is just working with my colleagues and working with tremendously talented people who always push me to the next level and who always force me to try to reach higher to grab that brass ring. Um, I'm I'm not remembering wrestling Swole in Queens of Combat. We definitely wrestled a few times in Charlotte under the NWA banner for some events that they had. And you see her on AEW. She's tremendous. She's a fantastic athlete. Her timing is pristine. She's one of George South's originals. George South is, a legend in the business. And so she knows what she's doing. So I know I will always have a good match with her. I'll always be able to tell a story with her. Additionally, when we wrestled in Charlotte, I had a wardrobe malfunction, and every time that happens, she hooks me up. So, definitely someone that I want to be in the ring with because I know they're going to take care of me and make sure that I'm taken care of, which are two different things. Um, so yeah, it's tremendous to be able to share the ring with, these women who are phenomenal athletes, but just based on how wrestling is perceived, may not get that same amount of shine, and it's difficult. Now I do remember wrestling solo in Queens of Combat. She's so fun. She's my veteran. And she's a great veteran. She's someone who I would definitely share a ring with any day, anytime. She's actually still of the old school walk and talk style, which I love. Being able to just go and tell a story and without having to script our entire match. I definitely don't like that too much. So being able to work with people who can move on the fly and storytell on the fly is definitely something that I'm always looking for in an opponent and in someone in a colleague. And so working with them, just fantastic and tremendous. And I've known Swole forever, even before she started training, because she actually started training after me. Um, Knowing her, seeing her growth, seeing her rise, which has been nothing short of meteoric. Seeing Cedric as well, because I know him from the Carolinas as well. Just seeing these people go on and represent and do such amazing things. It's very wonderful and heartening to see, especially as a woman of color, and seeing that at a higher level. It's always wonderful to see that and to know people are still out here able to achieve and able to live this dream even now in a Miss Corona world. So
So there's something you touched upon, and then I want to talk about Japan because I think your role in Japan and what you've done in Japan is the best part of your career so far. And I'm a little biased because I love anime and I'm a big Japanese fan and everything that their culture represents. But one of the things you said is that being taken care of in a ring. And I was actually at a non wrestling seminar with Bryce Remsenberg from AEW, and he was explaining that it took him like 18 years to get CPR certified as a referee, which was shocking to me. And I don't think he's going to mind me saying it because it's not anything negative, but it's that idea that what is that like to be able to trust somebody that they're going to be able to take care of you? God forbid a wardrobe malfunction happens or you get a concussion because that's a serious issue where knowing because there's certain people I would imagine that you think they'll take care of you, but maybe they're not going to pick up on it, or maybe they don't have the experience or the whereabout to do it, or even referees sometimes might not even catch it at first. And there's been plenty
right.
of stories like that where somebody has a concussion and then the referee, like 3 minutes in, realizes that the person has a concussion after a bad situation. So, what is that like when you're in the ring with somebody who just knows that whether they're a veteran or not? Because I would imagine that makes you feel much safer.
It starts before I get in the ring. When I get to the venue and I see who my opponent is, based on our interaction, that's going to let me know immediately whether they're going to take care of me or not. Um, I'm a very intuitive person. I don't like to throw empathic out there because everybody's an empath apparently, but I can feel when things are going to go wrong. And if certain benchmarks aren't hit in a match prior to us speaking or prior to us getting into the ring for the match, then I'm automatically I've learned to be on guard, to be aware, to protect myself. Not only to protect them, but to protect myself because this person hasn't demonstrated behaviors or characteristics that would make it seem that they're interested in protecting me and make it seem like they're interested in getting the story across. Trust is a big thing in wrestling. Whether people understand it or not, when we all step in the ring together, our lives are in each other's hands. And that is not just the wrestlers, that's the referee, because things can happen to the referee as well. The three of us are in that ring to tell a story, and it is our responsibility to each other to make sure we all can go home afterwards. I've been in situations where I definitely thought things were going to be okay because this particular person had the second generation status, which I assumed would make them cautious about
Oh,
doing
I know who you're
anything
talking about.
dangerous. So, and we're not going to say names because I would prefer not to do that, but I was under the impression for this particular match that they were going to be responsible. This was earlier in my career, and I was wanting to be amenable because this person had a name. And they proceeded to harm me and intentionally harm me during the match. I only did one move. It was a shoot choke to get them off of me, and then we finished the match. That was upsetting. And that was very disheartening because not only was this individual younger than me in the business, but they had a name and then they sought to change the story. And so they went and told places that I had not worked yet that I was a dangerous individual to cover up for the fact that they were the ones who were very dangerous and they were the ones who were behaving irresponsibly. Um, and so stuff like that, you try to look out for it and you try to be prepared for it and adjust to it the best way that you can, but it's going to happen. I have been blessed enough to be in enough situations where I've been able to speak with the promoter or the individual and kind of make sure things go better because after the first 3 years of my career, things were not great. There was a lot of danger. You know, I was concussed by a girl who didn't even bother to apologize and then had to wrestle her a few months later and she almost concussed me again. Untrained. She
And,
went to
and
training for
so,
like
how important, though, even to go beyond just the wrestler's trust, how important is it for you to have trust of a referee? Because I would imagine that, a referee, for those who don't know, and I think Chris Levin is one of the best referees out there. That's just my opinion, but a referee should need to know how to spot something. And a referee should know what somebody looks like when they're concussed, how they're
yes,
getting up. Not necessarily stopping the match, but even asking and playing that into the story can be very helpful because if you got concussed and the referee said, "Hey, are you okay?" and you say, "I'm not okay," obviously there's a way how to exit that match
right,
accordingly without hurting the entire card. But if it's something more serious, putting a TKO onto it or something like that, and then making it go a certain way and things like that, and obviously that's a ref's call. And what
right,
Chris was explaining, and he explained it live on my podcast and on this show, what he was saying is that he has complete authority to do so. And it's not,
yes,
the promoter is not going to yell at a ref for doing that. And I would
no.
imagine, though, back in the day, that might have been an issue.
I do think probably back in the day, because the control was given more to the talent and less to the referees in certain organizations, that relationship, altered. For me, I always want the best ref, and not because I want the best, which I do, but I want the person who is going to understand how wrestling works and can adjust to that quickly. I've been in a lot of matches with people who are younger than me and some people who aren't younger than me in the business where things have just gone horribly wrong. And because we did not have a good enough referee that I could communicate that to, the match itself was not able to be salvaged. There are things that go wrong in a match. You don't try to do it over unless it absolutely has to happen, but you do try to keep the story going. If you don't have a referee who can be that go-between of communication, who can also be that next pair of eyes and see, okay, this person's hurt, this person is lost, this person is out of the ring for too long. If you don't have that, it definitely does impact your match. And so I always want the most veteran referee. I always want the referee with the most experience. I always want the referee who knows how to communicate. Um,
You,
my
you
favorite
want
referee
you want
in
yeah.
my favorite referee in all of professional wrestling was Frankie, but he's at AEW now. But he was one of the ones at Queens of Combat who I knew I could always rely on. You know, my favorite referee up in the Mid South area, Sean Patrick O'Brien, Sean P. He is a Max Recon. They are two tremendous referees who always know what's going on, know their ring placement. If something's wrong, they're communicating with you and like, hey, this is what's happening. Do you need something? Are you okay? Do you need me to pass the message? Not giving too much away about the business, but the referee is really the sheriff of the match. And if you don't have a good sheriff, then it's lawless and the match cannot proceed. And what people don't realize is that lawlessness isn't a good thing for one or the other because it's complete chaos. And if we don't know the end point, if we can't get back on track, if we can't tell this story appropriately, then both of us look terrible. Both of us look like we don't know what we're doing, you know? And so a referee is definitely integral in making sure that people and the talent are on the same page. Everyone is safe. Everyone, if you need something, you can get that. There have been instances that match that I got concussed, it was a bad ref. I told him I was concussed 3 times. He ignored it. He said in the back he couldn't hear me.
It's crazy. I mean, just to talk about chaos, deathmatch wrestling is on the rise, and people think that's complete chaos. That is complete control of the ref in every single
That's
one of those
yeah.
matches.
That's
The ref
that is organized chaos. There's a difference.
the ref is in complete control. So I'm letting everybody know that if you think something looks like chaos, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's also organized.
Yeah.
And a good ref knows how to do that, and a good
And
ref
facilitate.
is on the ball, and
Yes.
it's
Because
super
there was an
important.
instance where I got split open and I didn't know that. Because your face bleeds worse than a lot of places. So I had gotten like cut right here somehow. I think her gear or something had snagged me, but I had gotten actually cut. So I was bleeding. And we were in a state where if there was blood, you had to stop the match immediately. We couldn't do that, unfortunately, because it was a title match. And so the referee at the time, when I was selling in the corner, gave me a hurt handkerchief out of his bag and was like, you need to clean the blood off of your face immediately because they will stop the match. Are you able to continue? Are you hurt? And I didn't even realize I had been cut. So I was like, no, I'm fine. I didn't even know I was bleeding. I thought I was just sweating.
It's a good
He
ref.
informed me that yeah, he was informing me what was going on. He was like, you need to clean this up or we're going to have to stop the match. I was able to sell and get it situated long enough that it stopped bleeding. We finished the match. I did not win, but we were able to finish the match. And I really was grateful to him afterwards because, again, I had no idea. I thought this was sweat, And so he, as the referee, saw what was happening, knew the parameters of the state, of the commission for wrestling, and what was going to happen if there was any blood, and stepped in to rectify that situation. And honestly, that's a lost art. People talk about referees and or Hall of Famers and people who have done great things in wrestling, but I think we need to talk about, the Keeners and the Hebners and the other referees throughout the history of wrestling who have really kept the train on track when things have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of unsung heroes in wrestling, and I
Oh,
think
for
that
sure.
a lot more people need praise, and I think that referees definitely need to be appreciated a hell of a lot more because they are just as important as anybody else in a wrestling ring, and sometimes even more
Absolutely.
important. You know,
Yes, because especially for newer wrestlers, and I remember this, that panicky, I don't know what's happening feeling. I was very blessed in my earlier years to work with organizations that had older referees who were experienced wrestlers. So they saw that deer in the headlights, I'm about to freeze, I'm about to F this up face. And they intervened, and they were able to peep game and to be like, oh, she's about to lose it. Hey girl, throw clothes on, do something. Like they were able to help me and guide me back at a time where I was traveling with no guidance. My trainers trained me and then they pretty much sent me to the wild. So having good referees and having a great referee in the ring with you, it makes all the difference in the match. And I would encourage people not only to watch the matches you love, but watch the referees. Watch what they actually have to do. They're not just standing around. Okay? They're watching everything. They're communicating everything. They're making sure we're safe, and that's a very important thing.
Yeah, I agree, and now I want to pivot away from referees because I want to talk about Japan because I think, as I stated, I think that's some of your best work, and obviously you've killed it. You know, pro wrestling, Diana, Rihanna, Seedling, Sendai Girls. You know, Marvelous is in there. World Women Pro Wrestling, everything. Japan.
JWP, yeah, 01, yeah.
At least 40% of your matches have taken place in Japan. I think is a fair
About four
assessment.
years. I spent 4 years of my. I spent literally half of my career there. Yeah. So
And so, how did you even get to Japan? Because Japan is an invitation type of thing, from my understanding.
yes, it was by invitation. But by invitation, well, I can't speak for them. I can say for me, I was actually about to quit the business. I was tired of running into brick walls in terms of being respected in wrestling. I was tired of running into the racism and the misogyny. Um, there were definitely times early in my career where people were very bold with the things that they said to me to my face, which in a way I respect, but at the same time, not what you need to be saying to an employee, which is what we are when we go to these wrestling shows. And so the wrestler that I was traveling with at that time saw my frustration. You know, he saw the difficulties that I was encountering when I would speak out about not getting paid or other wrestlers not getting paid. When I would say something about being put in an over sexualized position when that wasn't my character. When I would ask, you know, what is the story we're telling, not only what's the finish. I need to know the story so that it can be applied to what we're doing. I guess I was asking too many questions. So um I was hitting a lot of negativity that wasn't negativity because I was doing things wrong, negativity because I wanted things to be done right. And as we know, wrestling was steeped and started in the carny business, which isn't exactly or wasn't exactly on the up and up. And so I was coming up against a lot of old mentality that didn't want to change. And I was frustrated. And I didn't think, hey, maybe you should just keep going and change your approach and figure out a different way. I was like, F this, I'm done. So the director I was traveling with at the time, encouraged me to go with him to a show down in Hubert, North Carolina, where Steve Carino formerly had his training school and his promotion, PWF, Crystal Coast. And so I, what else was I going to do? So I went and I watched the show, and it wasn't like a giant card with a bunch of names on it, but it was a bunch of hardworking guys who just shared their passion and a crowd that was receptive. And it made me remember why I loved this and why I was meant to do this. Because regardless of what I was facing, there was somebody else who looked like me that needed to see me. And so watching the show, I was like, okay, maybe I won't quit, but I don't know what I need to do. And I definitely don't know if I need to do it here. And so I relayed that to Steve Carino. And I just told him, you know, everything that I had been dealing with and that was going on. And I expressed my frustration. And he was like, well, why don't you leave? And I was like,
Didn't even encourage you, did it?
well, I was like rude, like you leave, Steve. Like who are you talking to?
You didn't realize where he was going, did you?
Right. I had no clue. I was like,
You thought
well,
he
why
was
don't you
telling you to
leave,
quit.
sir? He wasn't telling me to quit. But at the time, in my mind, I was like, this, how dare you, sir? Like I was so,
Because,
and my
because
friend,
you
the
didn't
person, go
you
ahead.
didn't think you didn't think he meant to other
No,
places. You were, and I mean this very nicely. You were ignorant about wrestling outside of America.
well, no, I knew of Japanese wrestling because I had the a VHS tape, and I actually think I still have that tape of Aja Kong and Manami Toyota 1991, All Japan Women's. I knew of Japanese wrestling, but Japanese wrestling and going to Japan was
It
something that
didn't
I
click.
thought
It
about.
didn't click, right? That's a
No.
fair
It
statement. It
and
didn't click.
it was far because I assumed that in order to get to Japan, you had to be working at least like 10 to 15 years here before they would bring you over. I had no idea of how that worked. And so when he's talking about leave, I'm like, no, I'm not going to quit. What are you talking about? And he's like, no, why don't you go somewhere else and wrestle? And I was like, hmm? And he explained, that at this time they actually were just opening back up to having foreign talent come over for long periods of time. Why don't you try to go to Japan? And I looked at the person I was traveling with at the time, and he smiled because he knew that was the goal for me. My goal, the obligatory WrestleMania point, obviously, but for me, going to Japan, that was it. That's the crucible. That is the measuring stick for me. If you were a great professional wrestler, to this day, I am the only person who's been over there for that amount of time. And as a female, as a Black female. And so I was really confused, but also intrigued because I didn't think of that as an option and as a possibility. And then he was like, but it's invitation only, as you said. And I was like, well, okay. Thank you for the info. You have my info. If they want me, I guess they will reach out to me. He was like, that's all we could do. If they want you, they will reach out to you. And I think it was like a week and a half later, I get a message on Facebook from some random guy who ended up being my sponsor for Japan. And he was like, are you ready to come to Japan? And I was like, what? Who are you? Like, I spoke with Corino-san and he told me about you. I saw your material. We would like you to come to Japan for a year. And I was like, I'm already packed. My bag's literally packed. What do you guys need? Like, what do we do? So um, I did my paperwork. They sent my visa, and I got it back. And then, like, the week I got it back was the week I told my mother that I was leaving to go to Japan for a year.
So what was that conversation like? Because that's not a typical conversation. And like, how did your mom react? Because
Um, may she rest in peace. But and honestly, I can feel like her spiritual energy. Like I still hate the fact that she went against my wishes, legit. But she wasn't happy. She was not happy, especially because I waited that amount of time. But I knew that if I didn't have everything in order and there was no turning back, she would not have let me go. And so I had to do it that way so that she could allow me to go and see what I could do because I knew if I went one time, I knew I was going back. I knew I would keep going back because this is what I wanted and this is what I wanted to work for. And I knew that if it went through and the stuff was already done, then she wouldn't cancel it. But if it was still like in a pending, like we need your paperwork, your visa's still in progress, that she would for sure say no. So
she didn't want her baby to leave. You can't blame
yeah.
her. She didn't want her baby to leave.
Well, also, I'm from a very deeply Southern Christian religious family. I'm more spiritual than religious, and so that has always been a point of contention. But also, I did all the cotillion and the debutante and all that stuff, and that's what my family's about, like being a proper Southern lady and a proper Southern belle. And I never did that.
It was not
And
for you.
I mean, trust me, if you need Southern hospitality and you need a Southern lady, you will find it within me at that time. But regularly, I'm not running around preparing high tea or like going to book club or like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not my steez. So it was very challenging for my family to accept that this is what I wanted to do. But once I got over there and they saw what I was doing, they understood that I was serious and they understood that this was where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing, especially as a Black woman. Um, but they were not, and my mom was not on board, even though she was a wrestling fan because she knew Wahoo McDaniel and Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, and she didn't like Ric Flair. So, it was definitely an adjustment. But when I got the call or when I got my paperwork and I went, like I didn't even think I was gonna go because I was like, I don't want to get so hyped and excited that my dream is coming true and then it doesn't come true and I'm completely crushed. Because this is the one thing I've wanted for sure. WWE for me is still a long ways off. even though I've coming up on 10 years of doing this, I don't know if that's where I want to go just yet. You know, I've got some things I want to do and explore before I get there. But Japan was always like, no matter what, I'm getting there as soon as possible. And I'm so grateful that I went when I did because that helped shape the rest of my career, you know. And I honestly think the training saved my life and my body because the training in Japan is so different and so much more rigorous, but it prepares you for professional wrestling and to be a good professional wrestler. And I feel very grateful to have had my training style corrected early enough so that I could have carried that on. And I feel like that's honestly what has saved me in my body. But Japan was they saw me, they wanted me, they were like, let's go. And I went. And I went under World Women Pro Wrestling Deanna, but I was fortunate enough to work with Seedling also because Seedling at that time was training in Deanna's dojo. And so I was lucky enough to get to do 8 full hours of training with everyone all the time.
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this because obviously you come to Japan, they have a different way they do training, they have a different way they do wrestling, their culture is very different. And there's a lot of cool stuff about Japan. Obviously, Tokyo is a cool, place to be. I haven't gone yet, but I want to, and I know a lot about it. And also, they're just a fascinating country as a people and everything that they've brought over to America. Anime is their greatest invention ever. Got to say that. I'm biased. My company is Pop Anime Comics. Everybody, it's pretty clear to me where I stand on that fence. Wrestling is a close second. It's a close second. But all kidding aside, what was that like coming in as an American and you're a minority as well in Japan? And I know I'm saying this completely how it could be cut up and then taken out of context here, but what was that entire experience like? Because it's very, very different than anything else. And I would imagine culture shock as well, because here you are in a country that is very much Eastern and you're from the West.
But I will say that being from the West and raised in the South helped a lot because Japanese culture is 100% based on respect and a hierarchy. And that's how we're taught in the South in America. You respect your elders, you speak when you're spoken to, you help when you, even if you aren't asked, but you definitely help when you're asked. You make sure that the elders in your life are taken care of before you take care of your own things. And then you make sure that you show proper respect to the people who came before you. That is literally Japanese style. And so that wasn't a big transition for me. The whole senpai kohai dynamic, having to wash gear for my senpais and pack their gear bags and make sure that their stations were set up at shows and make sure they had everything that they needed. That wasn't weird to me. That wasn't anything new because that's what I did growing up. I'm an only child, but I had so many older people around me because of my mother and everyone she took care of in our community and in our family that serving and helping is natural. The culture shock was more of, I'm going to be honest, the patriarchy. That was a little hard for me to deal with and adjust to. And just the idea of at the time where I was in Tonomachi. The World Women Pro Wrestling Deanna dojo has moved since this time, but we were in Tonomachi, which is right by Tokyo Bay in Kawasaki. And so it was like a small town. You know what I mean? So they had not
Yeah.
seen someone who looked like me ever if they had never left that particular area of Japan. And so the shock of people walking by the opening of the dojo and then walking back and staring at me and then walking by and then walking back to see if that was correct that they just saw me.
I'm so sorry.
I mean,
I shouldn't be laughing, but I can imagine it. Like, I'm so sorry. It's so
like
terrible.
groups of, like, so I'm outside and we have the ropes that you have to do the whatchamadoodle with, but we had to put that outside. And so I'm outside like sweating, like dying, grunting. And you see a group of Japanese students coming from school to go home, and the whole group goes past, and then one comes back, and then goes. And the whole group comes and just watches me do this for like 5 minutes. And then they leave. So being an attraction, that was a new experience because here I'm more concerned about not getting gunned down in the street. So there, actually, people being like, what are you? Was an interesting dynamic. Being on the train and having people pull my hair because at the time I had my natural hair out while I was in Japan, and so having them pull my hair and I'm on the train and I'm like, that was interesting. I did have a few encounters of people doing this to see if the brown on my skin would actually rub off.
Wow, that's
Oh yeah.
crazy.
But
That's
honestly,
crazy.
I would take that sort of not knowing and prejudice because I don't call it racism inherently because I learned that Japanese people are honestly only seeing what they're given to see. If they're not experienced to Black culture, if they're not experienced to Black people, then they have no idea of what it actually is versus the stereotypes that they see that unfortunately come from our culture and our media. And so there was a lot of crossing the gap and trying to explain and bridge that sort of lack of understanding. But yeah, it was definitely very interesting to have to
And I would
explain
imagine, though,
race there,
I would imagine, though, that it also was a big learning experience for a lot of people. And obviously,
Oh,
when
for
you were
sure.
wrestling, you talk about it because, and I'm going to sound ignorant, but I don't know of another black woman wrestling in Japan off the top of my head. And I understand that it's ignorance, but and I also would imagine that there aren't many black women who have gone to Japan and spent time in Japan and to that degree. And
No.
you can call me ignorant on that one, but
No, but you're not ignorant because the honestly they have been doing such short tours. I think the longest they do now is about 3 months. So
and
for certain
so
organizations. So my tours of spending a cumulative time of 4 years there, I built a whole life there. Like I legit was in the process of moving there. And then unfortunately my mom got sick, so I had to come back home. But that was a big deal because before me, um, I'm forgetting her name out of Canada. But she and Kong were the only two women of color who had been there for a significant amount of time before I got there. And so when I popped on the scene, they were like, Big Bang Nicole, who was she? Like, what? So I was very well received just because, they hadn't seen someone like me. And I'm very different from Kong. And I'm very different from any other Black woman who has been there previously. So they were like, she's a beast in the ring, but she's like actually nice. What's happening here? Like, they were.
but I also think it's this idea that Japan is a very homogeneous society in many
Oh,
ways,
no.
and everybody looks the same. They have school uniforms. I mean, in
Their
America,
uniforms are so cute, though.
what?
I said their uniforms are so cute, especially like the little kids. Like they have all these little hats that all the little kids wear, and they're so cute. They have like little ear flaps, and you see them like all holding hands, walking together, or like all riding together in like a little wagon. They have like six little kids in a little wagon, like with a little hat on. It's so cute, dude. Like I can't lie. It was amazing because the kids are so well behaved there too. Like here, you got to put a kid on a leash so he doesn't run, you know. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, Andrew. Like when I see kids and I'm at the end of an aisle and I see a kid like go flying because the parent has yanked them on their child leash, I laugh. Okay, I'm sorry. Like you treated your child like a small terrier, and now you're like, what am I supposed to do with that? But like in Japan, it's so safe too. Like I would have my earphones on, blasting Kesha at like 3 a.m. on the way back from Rapungi, and was not. I'm fine. I'm not worried about being attacked or assaulted or approached in the middle of the night. I wasn't catcalled, and for me, that was like being in Japan was just such a relieving experience because I could actually be myself, and I didn't have to be on guard, and I didn't have to have my head on a swivel, so to speak, because the society is so safe. Granted, there again were the culture things that I learned that weren't good or that were, faux pas that as Americans we stumble into that. But honestly, my experience in Japan super surpassed China. China, they call me the N-word to my face.
That's
Thailand, they
crazy.
call me the N-word to my face. So at least in Japan, people were more subtle about wanting to know about me and learn about me versus when I went to other places, they immediately, demonize me and characterize me as something that I'm not, and I definitely don't like being called. So um it was a learning experience because you do have to learn the culture in terms of wrestling culture. You have to learn business culture. There are things here that we do that are frowned upon there. There's a order in which you talk to people, and that's the same here, but especially there, you don't break that. If you don't receive a response from up top, then you don't receive a response, and that's it. Whereas here, we're gonna keep talking to Karen and human resources until we get to Greg. I need to speak with your manager. So I did have to learn and adapt and adjust a lot of my behaviors for what Japan expected. But at the same time, I understood why. And it wasn't as if I was having to become a different person. It was more of fitting into what they expect of the people who come and are participants in their society. And I don't think that's unfair to ask because, again, I didn't have to change my personality or do anything different. I just had to make sure I was aware of what was going on. And I think as Americans, sometimes we take awareness for granted in other
There's a
places.
saying in business that, maybe the American way isn't always the best way to do business. And sometimes it is. And sometimes, making money in business is always good, but there's
Right.
different ways on how to do it. And understanding another country's culture is super, super interesting. And it can
Yes.
be very, very helpful in business, especially when you're dealing with international business. And so I think
Yes.
that's how I view this. What you're saying is that you just have to understand how to play in some of these sandbox and the rules they're presenting, and then you can
Yes.
thrive.
Right. And
Um,
it's not they're changing you or making you do something different. I've encountered people who came to Japan while I was there and they complained a lot about the rules and like what was expected of them and this and that and the third. And I'm like, we're in a completely different country. We're in a completely different arena. Why are you thinking that your way is the way that these individuals are going to respond to? That's not okay. When in Rome is the phrase. So when in Japan, when in Myanmar, when in China, when in Thailand, when in Canada, when in Mexico. You approach each situation by what the parameters of that particular group is familiar with and used to. That doesn't mean you have to not be who you are. That doesn't mean you can't do what you were sent there to do, but that does mean you have to place a different consideration upon your actions and interactions so that you can be represented in the best possible way. And Japan definitely taught me a lot about how to do that and well and better because we all have room to grow and learn.
and even just being in an arena in Japan is a very different experience than America. We cheer and we clap in America. We let you
Silence.
know
Yeah.
how we feel about a move. We let you know,
Yeah.
which is good, and it's
Right.
enjoyable. That is not what happens in Japan,
No,
where
not at all.
it's very different. Maybe it happens a little bit in New Japan wrestling, but for the majority of it, it doesn't really happen. And so, what was that like? 'Cause and I hate to bring it into this, but it's almost like this is pre-COVID response to some degree. Like,
Well, I mean, going for my very, very first tour, my very first match, I was in a tag match and it was me and Kagetsu tagging together. And it was insanity because it was so weird to not have them respond or clap or cheer immediately when you came out.
because you don't know if
But
you're doing it right, correct?
right. But then at the same time, it was also really gratifying because I was trained, and especially by Lou and Chile, the crowd is what tells you your response, but you are the ones who's supposed to lead it. So in a way, it was gratifying in a sense when they were silent when I was doing things that didn't require a response, but then they gave a big reaction for things that did require a response. For me, that was like, okay, it clicks with what my trainers taught me. Not everything needs to have claps or cheers, but the things that matter should get a response. And over there, that's definitely what happened. When I did things that required a response, they actually got one. But you are, here in the States, used to someone announcing your name, everybody clapping or booing or something, when you initially come out, and to not have that happen was definitely jarring, but I got used to it because you still have that reinforcement in a way. So you'll hear like randomly, even when it's quiet, Nicole, combate Nicole. Combate means do your best, work your hardest. So you hear that randomly, and so that is, I guess, comparable to what we would have here with people constantly cheering and clapping and making noise. But one thing that I have noticed, even pre-corona here in the States, is that cell phones has definitely contributed to a lot less crowd interaction. In some places, it's almost becoming Japan-like because people are so on their phone. They're trying to film, they're trying to Snapchat it, they're trying to Instagram it, they're trying to put it on YouTube. And so they're not engaged in the match, which means they're missing a lot, and they're not responding in the same way that we're used to. Somebody watching the match the whole time is going to respond in that way. But it's definitely, yeah, it's definitely different. It's definitely drawing. Now, Korakuen and like Tokyo Dome are different because that's such a big arena. Everyone is excited and you feel that energy. And so you have like that rumbling of noise, that constant rumbling. But in smaller venues, and like when I was first introduced, because my first match was in Face in Shinjuku Face, um, it was quiet. They give you your when you come out, but then once the match starts, it's you and your opponent in that ring, and it's the grunts, and it's the and it's the selling, and it's everything with you guys in the ring versus the audience, hyping it up and this is awesome chants and all that type of stuff. So yes, it's definitely a different culture. It's a culture shock. Coming back to the States was reverse culture shock, which I didn't know was a thing, but is. And so it was definitely an adjustment, but it also was very gratifying knowing that the things you do in sequence, and once the story arc that you were telling was paid off, that they reacted to it, so it gave you that sense of completion and accomplishment because you're getting that payoff in a reaction.
And even to go off of that, because obviously you come back to the States, obviously you spend a lot of time in Japan, and you come back to the States. What was your biggest takeaway from Japan? Because obviously you spent, 4 years totaled up in Japan, obviously different culture. You said they sort of saved your training to some degree, as well as different wrestling style, and even just also having a broader expansion of wrestling knowledge, where I don't think that unless you go to Japan and spend time in Japan, that you're going to be able to have that knowledge and have a different perspective on the industry. And
Right.
obviously, as a podcaster, I interview people from all over the world. And because I've been doing this 6 years, I now have a very different perspective, especially even just in the United States. When you're interviewing people from California and I'm on the East Coast, I start to adapt different words and different positions and even
Right.
different thought process. And then you're interviewing people from Ohio, you get a different sense of things. And then throw in Japan and other parts of the world, obviously, and in your case, obviously, strictly Japan for the most part. So, what was that like when you came back to the States? What was like the biggest takeaway? Because it had to influence you.
Um, I think my biggest takeaway from my first tour of Japan was reinvigorating my love for professional wrestling. Up until that point that I left, when I was telling you I was very frustrated, um, I didn't view professional wrestling and the people in professional wrestling as two separate entities. But after going to Japan, after that first year and that first tour, because my tours were always split into two parts. Um, I learned that you have to look at the person, and that professional wrestling itself is blameless. Professional wrestling itself is an art form that has been passed down through the ages. It is one of the oldest living forms of an oral history that still exists to this day, from ancient Sumerian times across continents, and across the world. Um, I think what Japan I took away from that first tour and that first experience was a deeper appreciation of what we do and the ability to separate what we do from the people who do what we do. People can be wonderful and amazing and great and
It
hopeful
can
and
suck
helpful
too.
and positive, you know? But as we've seen, and especially last year with Speaking Out, people can also be very treacherous and nefarious and not have the best interest of others at heart. But that is not the same thing as professional wrestling. Those are the people that are imposing their will, their motives, and their beliefs upon the art and using that as a vehicle for whatever their narrative is, and that is not what wrestling is. Wrestling is a beautiful brutal art to be shared. It is a performance. It is theater. It is pageantry. It is athleticism. It is all of these wonderful things that come together in an amalgamation to create the entertainment that we watch. But the people within that are still people and should be separated from the art because we are not our characters 24/7, 365. And we cannot attribute the negative aspects of an individual to the art of professional wrestling itself because they did not create wrestling and they are not the ones who sustain it. The lockup is recognized around the world because the lockup is wrestling. It is the move set. It is the storytelling. It is the structure. That is what wrestling itself is. And so going to Japan and going especially out of frustration, it really showed me that wrestling itself is something that is so beautiful and so positive, and that we have to work very hard to separate those who don't have the best intentions for others and for wrestling and not allow that to dim the love that we have for the sport and for the art, not allow that to, inject itself into how we operate within the business. Because in Japan, it is business. There were, excuse me, there were wrestlers that I did not know who didn't like each other when I was in Japan. You wouldn't know that. I found that out being out with the girls and drinking and talking. You wouldn't know these particular wrestlers didn't like each other because their locker room behavior, their in ring behavior, and their out of ring behavior was professional to the T. They
It's
didn't
called
allow
professional
any petty,
wrestling.
right. They didn't allow pettiness to come into the ring. There was a match that I had with a young lady and we wrestled in PA and she was shooting on me because we had both been involved with the same person. What? That would never happen in Japan because in Japan it's taken so seriously of the business of the art of what we do that these fans deserve top quality performances, that we deserve to perform and excel in this in the best possible way without all of the other, rigmarole. And so over there, I got pure wrestling. I was able to learn, understand, and see how wrestling businesses truly can operate in a collective way because a lot of promotions work together over there. People don't know that, but a lot of promotions do work together because they're running the same venues. So they have to have a business relationship. And it is so much so that if you are not about the business relationship there, then you are cast out because the point is the business, doing good professional business. And being in Japan for that amount of time, seeing these people who run these companies, run these shows, being second, having to come in and set up and set down, being in the office, listening to the planning of the shows, listening to what everything is going on. So much focus was put on to making sure that the show and the event itself went well that the other stuff was so inconsequential. Now, as a foreigner, I have to, admit to I don't know everything that went on behind the scenes because I don't speak the language fluently and I don't know all the ins and outs. But from my experience and what I was taught, and what was said to me when I asked questions about specific things, people were operating as professionals, even if they hated each other to the core.
Yeah.
Whether or not that happens here, it's a toss up. Here, I've noticed that it's more of who you know, playing the game, if we're friends, if we're not friends, if I gave you a blowjob, if I gave you, there's so
Yeah.
much extra stuff in terms of
I'll,
what it takes to make it.
I'll elaborate on that. So I'm on the outside and I'm a podcaster. And I like to think that I'm professional as possible. And I think I'm relatively professional. I'm very much respectful. I don't shoot people weird emails or anything like that. And I don't think anybody that I've interviewed will ever say that. And if they do, then we obviously have a problem because I'm going to get a lawyer, but that's a different discussion completely. But I get shoot upon by sending like a tweet to somebody when I'm doing something and I say, hey, I'm putting money on this person, and then I get shot on for no good reason. And then my terminology is when I say, oh, that person's money, it means they're a superstar. They're great. In a match, if I put them in, they're going to be a big draw. Like, I don't think that, and I get shot on for that sometimes. And I'm not a wrestler. So I can't imagine what it's like because I see it all the time. And there's also a difference between when people are shooting on each other and they're wrestling each other in 2 weeks versus when it's a real shoot.
Now
Because
let's call that term a little bit, because being shot on is
yeah,
definitely something that is a physical actual act. And so I would say when you
right,
are the target of malice would be a better
yeah,
term for that. When you're the target of malice and of that internet bravado everyone seems to have these days. But there is a big difference between someone putting you in a legitimate shoot hurting move in the
yeah.
ring and having an internet interaction. So I definitely want to make that distinction. But
I mean, I just think that in the U.S. people have forgotten that this is professional wrestling.
yes,
If you're if you're working for ESPN and you hate your co-host for whatever reason, you're not going to publicly blast your co-host.
right, right.
You might have a private conversation with your kid about it or your
Or
best
your
friend.
friends, right? But you're not going to go on the air and be like, "You're an old piece of shit," and I think you should get off the air. Like,
So I don't get that mentality in which that, and I also would tend to think that people sometimes who hate each other work the best together. And for whatever reason, because they say, hey, I want to put on a killer match, and I want everybody to think that we're okay, but we're not. And I'm sure
yeah.
that people have those discussions saying, look, I don't like you, you don't like me, but I'm a professional and you're a professional. So I don't get that entire mentality.
Now, I haven't had those discussions. I've definitely heard through the grapevine of people who don't like me and who seemingly have a problem with me, but when they're in my face, they don't ever say anything about it. So I have very rarely encountered here where I have been approached, and I've honestly can count it on one hand the number of times I've been approached by another wrestler or athlete within the business who has heard or said something or thought something that I said, and they came to me directly about it. And those are people, honestly, that we don't have a relationship, but I trust them more
You probably
because
respect
they,
them more.
right. And I respect them more because they came to me. We had a conversation. I cleared up what needed to be cleared up, and then we were done with it. And that was it. We didn't have to have some big drawn out thing. We didn't have to go into a Twitter war. We didn't have to subtweet each other for 3 days. Like, we didn't do any of that.
Full
Like,
professional wrestling.
yes, and I definitely think, especially in an industry where we take each other's lives into each other's hands, we got to talk. If there's a problem, we have to communicate. And it's not through 190 characters. It's through, hey, can I talk to you on the phone? Hey, can I email you? Hey, can I message you on Messenger? Like, there are ways to connect with each other and to eradicate problems that I do not feel a lot of people are taking advantage of or are brave enough to take advantage of. Let's just be honest. A lot of people are being scared, but you're not afraid to say the things you say. So, what are we doing? We're
And
going to be
also,
adults or are we going to play that high school game?
and also things should be private, not public. There's an old
Yeah.
saying. that if you can embarrass somebody privately, it is always better than doing it publicly. And how I
Absolutely.
could take it a step further, where if I have a problem with somebody, it should be handled privately first, and it should
Absolutely.
remain private as long as it can. And,
Yes.
and I say this because sometimes it's just a misunderstanding. I'm sure that you've had something where you might have done something and you're like, oh man, I apologize and everything's fine again, in which that happens to everybody in society. So I
Yeah,
don't get it, and I think that a bunch of people forgot the word professional in wrestling. It's
I do.
not. This is a professional thing. It's not you and your cousin out in the backyard. You know,
No,
it's people are paying money to see this, and I'm a
to
fan
see
first and
you.
foremost. So I don't want your drama out on Twitter and you saying, "Hey, Andrew, you got to pick a side." Like I
Right.
hate that.
That's not your position as someone who consumes the art we're creating. You don't know the beefs between artists when you go to an art museum. Why would you need to know that in professional wrestling? Unless that's furthering a storyline. You know what I mean? I know that they've worked that whole work shoot thing is kind of cool right now. So people don't like each other are actually working together and, kind of creating a story in that way. I understand that. But when you have people who are individually not cool with each other and just take going back and forth, airing out each other's grievances and dirt and whatever, that is not what this business is about because you don't see that with Paul Bettany and Elizabeth Olsen. You don't see that in other industries. It seems that only wrestling is the industry that thinks it's acceptable to do that type of thing, and it's not. Because if that's the case, then we need to take professional off the beginning of it because that's not professional behavior. All of us have had jobs outside of professional wrestling. We know what it is to be in a professional environment, and it should be up to us to maintain that even in an arts industry. Because I consider professional wrestling the same thing as I would consider marching band or color guard. It's a performative art. You are performing, there's athletic elements involved, but it's still an art form. And there is no reason for people who consume our art that we are supposed to help make feel better, allow to suspend their disbelief, to know that person X banged person Y's boyfriend and now they can't have a show because everybody's upset. Like what?
It's
No.
crazy.
It's crazy. It's literally crazy. We need to all take a step back, evaluate what is really important and whether we actually love wrestling or not. Because it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to conduct yourself in a way that reflects it.
I agree. I agree. And I'm not interested in drama. My life is already stressful enough. I don't need
Right.
your people's dramas in the wrestling world.
No,
I don't need it. I just want
right.
to watch legitly two people sort of beat the shit out of each other in a ring. No offense to anybody.
No, not taken. You want to watch what we're set to do. And
And,
that is
and,
what
and I'm
all
paying for
you
it.
should have to worry about. You shouldn't have to worry about two wrestlers going back and forth on Twitter and you just happen upon it and you're like, well, what's going on with these guys? Because we're all human. So we're all going to be like, what's happening here? We all have that within us. That whole curiosity killed the cat. No, curiosity killed the human because we all have that in us. And when we see these things, it's not wrong for someone to ask questions and wonder what's going on, but it is inappropriate and it's wrong for professionals to be putting that out in the media so fans can see it, so fans can get backstage into that. If you are not of the mind of the fortitude to confront someone directly about a problem or an issue, then maybe you shouldn't be tweeting about it because Twitter is not going to resolve the issue and Twitter is not the place or Facebook because I see these long Facebook posts about craziness. That's not resolving what's wrong. So if you aren't going to go to where the issue is and try to resolve it as an adult and as someone who gives another human being respect and dignity of conversation and problem solving, then
Yep.
I personally don't have the time for you because you're not doing any service to wrestling. You're doing service to yourself. And
There,
this
there's
business is not supposed to be selfish, even though it's an ego driven business. We're supposed to create something for others. And if people aren't of the mind and of the willingness to squash the ego down and to be in the position that they need to be in and do the work that needs to be done to reach the fans and create this wonderful community that we can share with the world, then they honestly, I believe, don't need to be a part of it, Andrew. Plain and simple.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. So to switch back to something more positive, there's only two more matches I want to talk about. And it's Uncanny Attractions, Drag and Drop Kicks, one. And I love Eddie McQueen. I'm not ashamed to say it. I think Eddie is great. I think Eddie is fantastic. I love everything that Eddie touches. And I think Eddie is beyond underrated. And
Big
I
shout out
am
to
not
Eddie. She knows she's my bitch. I love
I'm not going to
her.
pretend. I was very happy about that win for Eddie. So nothing against you, but I really enjoyed that match.
Even though that win was trash, and done deceptively. Yeah, I still love Eddie, and I still, I stand behind Eddie because she's been through so much. She has dealt with a lot of, not great things in the business, and it is wonderful to see the progress, especially because we were both, Queens of Combat originals. So seeing Eddie, rise meteorically and being able to work with Eddie at Uncanny is amazing. Big shout out to Lynn Fraley, Darnell Mitchell, MV Young, all of the Uncanny and Attraction staff. Big shout out to Lynn. I love her so much. But uh, Uncanny was something truly unprecedented, and to be a part of that organization and to be asked to be a part was tremendous for me. As a Afro Latina of the queer community, you would think I'm asked to do a lot of things, but I'm not. And so to have Uncanny come to me and be like, we want you to be a part of this. We see the value in you and the value in who you represent as a part of the whole fabric of being a person in this world was really wonderful and so gratifying, and I feel very grateful to have been a part of that show. That show was intense and crazy and amazing. And one was fantastic, two was fantastic. I can't wait till Miss Corona gets out of here so we can get back to doing that again.
And then there was you were part of another one, and
Yes,
Mama
that was the
Calloway.
second one. Yes, and actually tagged with Big Swole, against Main State Posse and the main event. So it was us two ladies against these four dudes, and we put in the work. We put in the work. It was so fun to tag with Swole. I mean, her energy, her presence, her experience. I'm so proud of her and everything that she has learned because she came in later, but she picked it up instantly. She worked so hard. Not only is she a tremendous wrestler, but she's a wife and a mom. Like her daughter's young. So like it's so amazing to see how she wears all these hats and juggles all these things. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to figure out like what I'm gonna eat tomorrow. Like it's so awesome. But that whole show, Uncanny itself, I love the concept. I love what Lynn is doing. I love the fact that she's creating a place for everyone of the LGBTQ community, but not just for LGBTQ, just anybody who feels marginalized, anybody who feels other. It's almost as if the island of misfit toys has come together to create this amazing product that everybody can share. And especially running at House of Yes, like top 10, one of my favorite venues. I mean, well, actually top five favorite venues in the world. But it's an amazing experience working with them, truly. And everybody on that particular in that organization and on those shows has such an appreciation for each other and a respect for each other that I have honestly not found other places. And it's just coming in when I did in the 2010s and seeing how things has changed now. It's really refreshing, Andrew, and it makes me feel hopeful that professional wrestling will continue to evolve, continue to fold in marginalized communities, continue to be a presence in the lives of everyone because it is. I was just looking; they had a Fuller House. They did a wrestling episode. Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They did a wrestling episode. Um, what's that? American Housewife. They did a wrestling. Like everyone knows and responds and understands wrestling, and it's in all of this media that we consume. And so for Uncanny to take it to the next level and make sure that people who aren't usually consumed, so to speak, in wrestling are represented, that was a big deal. That match was amazing. My match there, the Halloween show was fantastic with Tara Calloway and oh gosh, Dark
Nurse
Sheik, Nurse Ratchet. Yes, that
Mama
was
Calloway.
crazy. Yes, I love
It's
Tara. And it,
so the reason why I call her Mama Calloway, for those who don't know, Tara is like a mother to every single wrestler ever. Like it's
true.
not even
Yes.
funny. Like it's funny when like what I'm saying and I'm laughing about it. But Tara Calloway is legitly has like mentored so many wrestlers. It's
Yes.
not even funny. Like the list just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's amazing. And I love Tara Calloway.
She is tremendous. She is my vet. And it was really wonderful to share a ring with her, to plan out what we were gonna do with her, to just because up until that point I hadn't worked with her. And the funny thing, Andrew, my original gimmick that I came in with when I was down at Eddie's in Fayetteville, I wanted to be a pterodactyl. And I knew nothing about Tara, but because I grew up on Land Before Time, I wanted to have a Petrie type gimmick. And I wanted the hat and the wings, and I wanted to perch on top of the top rope and and like do a screech and have like little kids in like Petrie outfits with me. So they were like my little pterodactyls, that could interfere in the match and stuff. Like I had this all planned out. It was all planned. And then I broke in and I saw that Tara was already doing it, and I was like, oh! But that's okay because that allowed me to become Big Bang, But it was so funny how even before I met her, we had similar ideas about stuff. But yes, she is definitely a veteran who has taken the reins of being a mother to a lot of people in the industry. And it's so funny because I don't think people realize as women, we don't have a lot of veterans. Even though there are a lot of women professional wrestlers and there are women professional wrestlers at all levels, we on the independent level don't have a lot of mentors. There are women who will reach back and help out, but on the whole, a lot of us have done this on our own. We haven't had the guidance of veterans in the business. And so that's why when I was in Japan, I was so happy and I felt so fulfilled and gratified because I had people to go to talk to get advice from. These women have been wrestling for 20 plus years. I was 10 years old when they started wrestling, and so of course I'm going to go to these women and ask them and try to get as much information as I can so that I can learn and be a better professional myself. But I ran into a lot of roadblocks here in the States where my messages were unread. People saw them and didn't respond. I was blown off. And so going to Japan and receiving that sort of mentorship, they really take the senpai kohai relationship to a level that I honestly think we should bring back here in the States because you aren't ever alone. You're never walking without somebody who can lead you. You're never experiencing something without somebody who's experienced it before having your back. And I think that that is something that is very important for new wrestlers and for wrestlers who are becoming more seasoned. Until you get to that point to be on your own, so to speak, it's definitely important to have someone there who is able to engage with you in a way of giving you advice, not dictating, but giving you advice to guide your path. And I definitely appreciate being in wrestling in Japan for that because unfortunately here in the States, I didn't have that experience. A lot of wrestlers of color that I reached out to left me on red. They did not respond. Female wrestlers in the business who have not really given me a lot of of advice that even though I've asked them for it. And my thing is if you're wanting to learn, you're wanting to further your education, you're wanting to be the best in the business, you have to go back in order to go forward. You have to contact those people who've done this already. You have to have conversations and dialogues so you can figure out your next steps and how you can further beneficially impact the business. But if people aren't willing to have those conversations with you, what do you do? So I feel very grateful that when I went to Japan, that was completely eradicated. I could go to any of my senpais at any time and speak to them broken English conversation, but speak to them about what was needed and what could be done to help my career, what I could do to help the business, and what moving forward needed to be done to help the business. And I'm very grateful to Japan for that, for sure.
And then also to talk about groundbreaking positions, I think Uncanny is one of them. And then obviously
Oh yes.
prime time pro wrestling and obviously we're going to table everything that happened beyond that. But I think Butch vs. Gore stands on its own. Where I think it
Oh yeah.
was very groundbreaking. It
Oh,
was
for sure.
obviously one of those shows that I think really started to break down the door. I think Effie's Big Gay Brunch really knocked the dam down, in my opinion, even further. But obviously, I think Butch vs. Gore, I don't think Effie's Big Gay Brunch would have had such an impact if it wasn't for Butch vs. Gore. I
No,
really
I don't think so. And I think Butch versus Gore also opened up something that Effie hasn't done. I'm gonna say it. Effie likes to book his friends and book people who look cool in the LGBTQ community. Butch versus Gore pulled everybody. Everyone who was represented in the LGBTQ community was presented on this show. The variety of individuals was so multifaceted. I honestly think that's like the top as far as LGBTQ representation in shows has gone. I have yet to see another show bring in that diverse, that creative, that versatile of a group since that time. And I think people are afraid that it's not going to work. But as we saw, DC Brow was packed. It was packed out, standing room only. So please don't think that the LGBTQ crowd can't draw because that's wrong. I so appreciate Primetime in making sure that people from all walks of life are represented because just as Black people aren't a monolith, people of the LGBTQ community aren't a monolith. Not all of us are flamboyant and out. Not all of us are, conservative bears. Not all of us have the same perspective and the same experience in life being a queer person. And I feel like they did such a great job representing all corners of that perspective. And I really have to tip my hat to them because prior to that, there was only one other organization that was really focusing. We saw how that turned out. And, it's unfortunate that things had to go that way, but I really admire and I'm very grateful to Primetime for stepping up and filling that void and making sure that within that void, everyone of the LGBTQ community had a voice, had a shine, had a moment to showcase their abilities. And I think that's really what I loved so much about that show. And I got to meet so many people that were of the community that I hadn't met yet because there's a lot of newer wrestlers up in the north and northeast and northwest that I had not met at that time. And so it was so cool to have these people come together and to create this amazing show. And I had an awesome time in my match and it was just really fun. And I was grateful because I had been missing that in wrestling stateside, just having fun doing it again.
So I enjoyed Butch vs. Gore. I was in the front row. I was sponsoring the Effie match, so this is a little awkward here. I love Effie, but I was on the Effie train way before Effie was where he was. I was one of the earlier adapters, and I get the argument with Effie, and it's hard to argue against it. Where I definitely realize there's certain faults, but I also realize what he's done is also at the same time, and I think you can acknowledge both. Not to throw shade,
Absolutely.
um,
No,
and
absolutely. It's
me
always
and Russell wrote.
important to acknowledge what we've done, but it's always important to realize that we have further to go and there's still more work to be done. So never at any point invalidating the tremendous work that was created and created around the community that Effie helped to spark. Absolutely not. But I do think, especially with Effie, as a guy and as a white guy, his job is to be an advocate because a lot of times what people don't realize is that people of color and marginalized communities don't have the power. So it is up to those in power and with the power and influence to speak on the behalf and to open up those channels for people who don't have that. So never, never, never taking away from Effie and all of the magnificent and wonderful things that he's done with what I guess this will be coming up on Mania the third gay brunch. Is that right? Yeah, that
Oh,
it will be the
second,
third.
second.
The second one, right? Oh yeah, because of Mania last year. Um, so, never dissuading to that. But we do, as performers, once we receive a platform, we do have to use it responsibly. And we do have to make sure that the aims of those who we may not see and interact with are also a part of what we're doing, because that doesn't just benefit one group or the other. It benefits everyone. For every person to see the variety in the LGBTQ community, in the Black community, in the Asian community, in the Hispanic community, because all of these things are so reflected in the society we actually live in. I I'm reticent to not show that within our own industry. You know, we should be a reflection of what life really is at all points. And I definitely think while wonderful things have happened, we still got to keep climbing. We still got to keep pushing that level. We still got to keep pushing, you know, that ceiling higher and higher until it is normal for there to be people of color, women, LGBTQ on every card, and it's not such an
So
attraction.
I think one of the wrestlers, and I give him major props, is AC Mack, where I
Oh, for
think
sure.
AC Mack is very much the poster child for this. To put it nicely, where I think AC Mack and everything AC Mack has done is that I didn't know AC Mack was gay until Butch vs. Gore. It never
Yeah,
crossed my mind. It never ever hit me. I never associated with it. I was like, AC Mack can shit talk like nobody else in this business, and how is he not signed? As a
right.
manager, not as a wrestler, AC Mack is unbelievably good on the mic. And it
Yeah.
never, ever came across
It
me.
never
I never
occurred of
knew
you,
AC
right?
Mack.
It never occurred to you that he was of the community, right?
O'Shea Edwards, neither. Never
Right.
occurred to me. It just was
But
like,
the thing
holy
is
shit, O'Shea will kill me.
and and while that isn't shouldn't be prevalent in precedent, you know, it shouldn't be I'm gay before anything else. The fact of the matter is that's a part of these individuals. And that is a part that has been hidden for so long, and especially as an individual of color, because I'm not sure if you know, but you know, in the Black community, it is, and often in the Hispanic community, it is not great. It hasn't been looked on with favor to be queer. And so to have these individuals who represent so many facets of our society, and for you not even to know, it's honestly because there wasn't a place and there wasn't an appropriate introduction to that. And so so many of us have had to live with this whole secret identity, even though it wasn't really a big secret, but we didn't have a place to go in order to be recognized and to be seen as who we completely are. And honestly have to credit Butch versus Gore for doing that. Unfortunately, you know, Primetime had to do its own rejiggering of the internal works, but I definitely credit Lolo for Lolo McGrath for taking the reins and making sure that people were represented, people were respected, and people were seen at these events, because, you know, in the past it's been such a big outwardly festive thing with certain organizations, whereas not everyone is that way with their identity and their sexuality. And I love that Butch versus Gore allowed everybody to be who they were within the community, within the parameters of the show. And it was just such a beautiful thing to witness. Everybody just walking their truth, living who they were, and performing as who they were at this event. And that honestly was, you know, I can't wait for Butch versus Gore 2, because I can't wait to do that experience all over again.
So I think Billy put it a really good way where he said, hey, you might know 5 wrestlers on the card, but you're going to have 30 new favorite wrestlers by the time it's over. And while
That's
I don't
true.
have 30 favorite wrestlers, I definitely have about 5 or 6 more that I'm looking at that
Yeah.
I definitely want to speak with. And I spoke to a few of them last Monday. Was a lot of fun. If anybody caught that interview, super interesting. It was Killian McMurphy, and he
Ah,
is
Killian.
a fun guy, and it was 50 minutes of wrestling and 110. It was an hour and 10 minutes of Sonic the Hedgehog. So that to give you an idea of what we were speaking about. And no, that is not sexual. Legitimately, we were talking about Adventure 2 of Sonic the Hedgehog for like 60 to 70 minutes. I'm not even joking. It was amazing.
Wow.
Went through how to raise your chow. It was super awesome. Um,
Nice.
so I
Nice.
need to make that perfectly clear because there's all these code words. None of that. It's a perfectly PG friendly interview that has nothing to do with anything wrestling for the most part. But anyhow, I digress on that point. Obviously, I enjoyed Butch vs. Gore. they got the Cassandra Cup is coming up, and I'm stoked for that. That's going to be fun. I have money on Killian McMurphy, so clearly he better win it. And I don't know what just happened. This is so awkward. And she's back.
Okay.
Yeah, woo. I thought I said something bad. Don't scare me.
No,
Anti-Killian McMurphy right here.
no, don't tell Killian that. He'll think I like exit out because of him. No, I'm sorry. That was a technical difficulty. I had a call and I was trying to like exit out of the call.
Clearly. I didn't know Killian McMurphy was like an ending of the interview right there. Clearly.
Right. He has all the heat. Right. No. I'm so sorry. I had a call. I was trying to get out of it. But yeah, Killian is amazing. And I love the fact that he is such a different LGBTQ talent because when I'm honestly, coming up in the 2010s in wrestling, it was like everyone was stymied either into the strong lesbian or the super effeminate man. That was it. You know what I mean? And that is such a ridiculous way to break down who people are and to characterize their sexuality. So I love Killian because he definitely brings that different flavor and that different energy, and who he is as a person I just enjoy. So I worked with him at Capitol. I guess they're Catalyst Wrestling now, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole bag of worms that I don't want to open up. I'm very torn on that because it's a very rough position because I liked and I followed Capital. It's one of those things that I was watching religiously, and then things happen.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, that's where I met him. That's where I met Killian. That was my first experience with Killian, because he hasn't come down south. And when I came back to the States, my focus was being stateside because my mother was sick. Unfortunately, she passed at the time. But so coming back into wrestling, from being international, he was one of the first people I encountered there that I was like, "Who are you?" And you're amazing, and let's be friends. So it was kind of a bittersweet experience, because I definitely felt like at the time that I was with Capital, a lot of great things were happening and a lot of positive things were happening. And then a lot of things that weren't positive happen. So it was definitely a surprise to a lot of us to find out that information after the fact. And, they weren't too happy with how I handled my returning of the belt, but I mean,
Medusa would be proud.
I think she would, and she was my inspiration for that. So
some heat for WWE. Let's leave it at that. For those who don't know,
for those who know, they know. For those who don't know, the video's still up on my Instagram. So.
I'm sure Adele, if he would also approve.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Listen, Lisa Left Eye Lopez. I mean, listen.
I mean, we could keep going, but we're not going to.
No, we're not going to. We're not going to.
Eddie, again, I am torn because I've had some positive interactions with Marcus, and so obviously and right now in wrestling, I have a feeling a lot of other people are feeling what a bunch of people felt back in the day as of a few weeks ago. So this isn't something that is a joke. I mean, we're obviously joking about it in hindsight, but obviously when people feel this way, things happen in wrestling. And I think fans and I think wrestlers and I think people on the roster have a right to feel however they want to feel. And everybody has a different reaction to all of this. So I think that needs to be said in a lot of ways where I can't tell a wrestler how they feel about when things like this happen, even with primetime. I can't tell somebody how they feel about it. So obviously things happen and it's unfortunate, but also there's a bunch of great companies that are run.
And that are still trying to do things the right way. I would encourage anybody who is consuming wrestling right now to support the companies that are doing things the right way, to support people that are following COVID protocols, to support people that are following, code of conduct and sexual harassment protocols, because there are companies out here who are seeking to make a change. There are places and people who are out here who have seen what has been done for so long, unfortunately, in our industry, and who are wanting to do something different and who are creating good. I won't say wholesome in the way that it's, without cursing or without vulgarity, but wholesome in the way that it's a safe environment and you don't have to worry about a
There's two
sex test
companies. The
being
two
made.
companies that come to my mind. There's three actually. Camp Leapfrog is a great company right now, and what they're doing, high
Mhm.
tension, I think is sort of associated with them. GCW, whether you like GCW or you don't, is killing it right now, and they're doing a good job. Not necessarily maybe PG, but I think they run a very good business, and I even think ICW
I
runs
see that. Yeah.
very
Now,
well. And
I will agree with you for sure on Camp Leapfrog and ICW, because I think those are two amazing organizations. Camp Leapfrog's it's like a cool, that's part of the new evolution of wrestling that I was talking about, and that's really cool to see, because I'm not of the old school, but I was trained by old school guys, and I came from a time during training of that remnants of the 2000s style of training. So I am old school and new school. I'm that weird hybrid class that gets the old school but sees what needs to be done with the new school. So Camp Leapfrog, I'm totally on board with. Um, you know, the, I'm going to be honest. I think Brett needs to answer for his racist rap video. I think he needs to explain himself. I think that just a post or a "I'm sorry" is not
I
appropriate.
don't know about this, to be honest, so I'm ignorant on it.
Oh, well, there was a rap video that was released by the owner of GCW where he used some racially charged language and some expletives that were not appropriate. And while he was a young man creating this video in his musical career, not explaining yourself and saying why you felt that you thought that was okay to say while you employ wrestlers of color is a problem personally for me. I don't feel it's appropriate as a business owner to not go ahead and address the things that in our past, and I say our past because we all have things that when we were younger that we did that weren't great and weren't, reflective of who we are as people. But in a country and in a time when racial issues are very high, when you are literally running a show called For the Culture, I have some additional questions about your flagrant and cavalier use of the N word in your musical
So, so,
pursuit.
so, so, so I don't know anything about this. This is the first time I'm hearing about this.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I'm not questioning, and again, I'm very ignorant on this. I haven't heard about this. Obviously, I know that GCW, definitely. I think, and I think they're starting to, is balance women's wrestling in there. I think ICW needs to sort of enter that as well a little bit,
Oh, for
but
sure.
obviously. I think that
ICW is at a PA, isn't that right?
ICW is deathmatch wrestling.
Okay, I thought I was talking about ICW out of PA. Okay, you're talking about ICW where Akira and
Yeah, John
Pat
Wayne
or
Murdoch
John Wayne
and
Murdoch. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
Danny D'Amato's. From
D'Amato. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
and
Now there's
and
also ICW in PA with the main event, Raylan, Heather Monroe. They're like the mainstays.
so the deathmatch company, Danny D'Amato. From what I know of him, he is very much a decent person. From what I know, and obviously everybody has skeletons in their closet, but that guy loves and cares about wrestling.
Yeah.
And I know that ICW might have some issues with GCW, and there might
Oh,
be some. I'm not 100% certain, but there's been some stuff that's been aimed at it, and sort of positioned, especially during Mania weekend. I don't know if it was a open shoot or if it was malice or if it was just to drive traffic, because that sometimes happens too, where you're
right.
playing both sides. But obviously, my understanding of that company is very well run. But I don't know much about what happened with GCW. And I think obviously I'm gonna have to look into it because I don't know what it all is dealing with. But obviously, I was not informed of that. So clearly, that I think
That was
answers.
during speaking out, and even though that wasn't a speaking out issue that came out during that time, a lot of things were dredged up in the past about people and things that they had said that were not congruent with what they were doing presently. I personally of the mind that if you were born, educated, and live in America, you got a little tinge of racism. Unfortunately, that's just how our education system is set up. We've completely whitewashed the stories of Africans, of Hispanics, of indigenous people, and we only teach one side of history. There's no way that you can claim to be a well-rounded person when you've only got one part of the story, unfortunately. And so I do think that that factored into a lot of what was going on, going back into people's history and addressing those issues of maybe racial insensitivity. But as a Black woman, and as a Black woman from the South, encountering someone who uses that terminology at a young age, it's not something that just goes away. It is something that has to be eradicated. It is something that has to be consciously worked on and drawn out of an individual so that they can understand and come to an to an, a safe and communicative place with opposite races. Um, Unfortunately, during that time, I did not see Mr. Lauderdale do any of that. I did not see any sort of apology, any sort of explanation for his behavior. I did not see anything to state that he didn't actually feel that way today. And as a professional, as a woman of color, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I have to personally look at things from a perspective of safety, and not just physical safety, but emotional and spiritual safety. And unfortunately, racism is a poison that will harm you mentally, physically, and spiritually. And so, if there are industries or there are individuals in our industry who are continuing to perpetuate these beliefs, even if they're not spouting them anymore, that's a problem for me because we're not actually eradicating the issue. What we're doing is just putting a band aid and just saying, oh, it's okay, they get a pass because they're providing places for people to work. But plantations also provided places for people to work. And we see how terrible and detrimental that is to certain groups. And so for me, in wrestling, not moving forward as some sort of social justice crusader, but moving forward as a person who wants it to be safe and acceptable for anyone to work anywhere, and for those particular skeletons to have been addressed and eradicated. And you were so right, Andrew. We all have things in the past that we may not be proud of, that we don't want to keep bringing up into our present circumstances. But at the same time, these are the experiences that form us and make us who we are. So if we don't address the bad things, how can we know that we aren't better people moving forward? How can we know that we aren't providing the best, safest, most equitable environment for those around us if we don't address the negative things that we have said and done in the past? And it seems like there's a lot of individuals who are forced to address that in some ways, but some individuals aren't. And I don't want the wrestling community to forget the amount of people who were affected not only by sexual indiscretions, but by racial indiscretions, because this is something that has been prevalent in the business since the beginning of the business. I think of Sweet Georgia Brown or even Woody Strode, who had to ride in trunks and be smuggled into all white hotels and motels during the territory days and during their time of wrestling because they were not allowed in these places. So we're not past the whole idea of racism and racial inequality, gender inequality, sexual orientation inequality. We're not past these things just yet, even though we have some amazing organizations and individuals leading the charge to change them. We still have a long way to go. And I would like to see people who are genuinely championing those causes to be at the forefront and to be the ones running organizations. And for us as wrestlers, not to cow to wanting to just be where the action is, but also standing on those resolute decisions to, if we're going to make the business better, then we have to sacrifice and we have to make it better through our actions and through what we do moving forward. Sorry if I got a little soapboxy with you there.
Hey, I'm cool with it. I let people speak. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I'm of the mindset that the more is out in the public open, the better ideas get set forth. Ideas get challenged.
yes,
I think that a lot of progress has been made in
absolutely.
definitely in a lot of sectors. I'm a guy with a disability. A lot of progress has been made, but then again, also a lot of stagnation has engaged and has whatever. And people think that just because you have an elevator means you get to stop.
Right.
And look, I want to earn my way in, meaning that I'm a student in any job. I don't want to be hired because of my disability. I want to be hired because I'm qualified and have a disability. And I think, but I also want the ability to be in a fair, competitive environment. Oops, did I do something again?
And competitive. I 100% agree. Sorry that I lost you again.
Again. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial all that much. And like, here we
No,
are.
Angel, I'm not trying to leave you. I'm so sorry.
So, to get away from controversy and talk about something completely uncontroversial, like religion. Not, no, no. And so obviously, I agree with a lot of what you said, and obviously, I want people to obviously feel safe in wrestling promotions. I
Right.
think that look, people should answer to what they've done. I don't think that Brett should have to leave GCW, but I think
No,
he owes an apology. It's not like
or an
some other.
explanation. Not even an apology. I just would like an explanation for the behavior and for why he thought that was appropriate. And then, as a person who's running for the culture, which is a Black themed wrestling event, how do you genuinely feel about that? Are you doing that just to make money? Are you doing that just because it's popular? Or are you doing that because you actually care and want to advance Black people? Because on
And
most
maybe
of your
he's
cards, you
evolved.
don't have minorities. Right. So I'm saying there has to be that conversation. We don't have to cancel someone just right off. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in just somebody makes a mistake and we cancel them. We all make mistakes and we've all made mistakes that are pretty not great to
I
begin with.
think that the best example is that there was a wrestler who was supposed to be on AEW Dark. Something was dug up about him. He
Mm-hmm.
made something 10 years ago. I think it was either against gay people or black people. And then what happened is he sort of acknowledged, said, look, I was an angry young guy at that time. Obviously, I don't feel that way now. I've evolved as a human being. And look, he got heat for 2 months. And then people were like, what is this guy? Obviously issued an apology. It's clear that he doesn't feel that way. And look, it was on his Twitter. This is buried 30,000 tweets in. It
Right.
is maybe, it is we dug something a little bit too deep that we actually had to actively look for it.
Well, I
And
don't think it's digging too deep. I think people say what they say and they mean what they say. But there is a statute of limitations. But even with the statute of limitations, there are things that have to be addressed. And racial issues are one thing that cannot be ignored, swept under the rug, or advised to others as it's how they felt at the time, but they don't feel that way anymore. Because we all have prejudices. We all have different facets of that are not great and that don't allow us to see people for who they are, that don't allow us to be functional members of society because we don't allow ourselves to see and hear the other side because we've been so conditioned not to. And so while I'm not saying don't wrestle for GCW, don't do anything with them, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are a leader in the wrestling community, expect for when things that you have said that are negative or contraindicative to people of color or marginalized communities, expect to explain yourself and do so in a way that people can trust you again. Because I don't trust Brett Lauderdale because I don't know him. And from what I've seen of him, is it safe for me as a person of color? So, regardless of how he feels now, as a person of color, I don't feel safe around him because I haven't heard anything from him that states explicitly, this is how I feel. I was not this, I made a mistake. This is not what I'm about. I don't feel that way. And then demonstrate that through booking and business practices. Because even if that happened and I missed it somehow, we haven't seen through GCW's booking practices that he doesn't feel that way. We haven't seen him book minorities and LGBTQ and other marginalized individuals in a way that reflects that he doesn't feel that way. And so for me, I need the message and the actual practice to line up. We don't need to cancel people. We need to give everyone a chance to explain themselves and to go forward in this business with a fair, equitable viewing of what their actions were,
You
because
need
it's
to
not
give
the
people
territory.
you need to give people an opportunity to curate and rectify their behavior before you
Absolutely.
cancel them.
Yes,
Within reason, and
within
I say
reason, for
within
sure. Yeah, yeah,
reason because there's certain things that can't be
oh
fixed.
no. Right.
But
There are certain
I think
individuals who were sex pests who are definitely
I
enough
think
to be
Brett
canceled,
I think Brett deserves the opportunity to
to
rectify
explain himself.
and
Yes,
curate the situation and
absolutely.
demonstrate before the cancellation. You know,
Absolutely. And
and I think
I honestly don't think Brett needs to be canceled. I'm not saying cancel Brett. I'm just saying Brett needs to answer. He needs to be sincere. But if he does genuinely feel that way, and if that is something withheld within him, then people of color and marginalized communities don't need to go there, because it's not a genuine place that you can go and be safe to work. And unfortunately, Corona has shown us with a lot of these promotions who have had to close because of financial reasons or otherwise, there are very few places that are available to us. And so these places, I personally am holding to a higher standard because you're the last one surviving. You're the last man standing, which means that you need to be representing wrestling in the way that it should have been represented all along, not in the way that the carny old way was represented. So
and so obviously I'm going to let you sort of wrap this up, and I think we've been talking for like 2 hours here,
yeah.
so I definitely want to give you an opportunity to promote yourself because obviously we spoke about a lot of stuff. So where can people find you? Because I know you got a Facebook page. I know you got I think you got a Twitter. I don't know if you have an Instagram. I think you have a
Yes.
website. I know you got some merch. And so obviously I
Yes,
want to
we
give you an
do.
opportunity to promote. Obviously, we spoke about a lot of stuff. So it's a lot of
We
stuff
covered the
that people can
gambit.
check out. It covers a whole bunch of ground, but obviously, where can people find you, support you, check you out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram if you got it, and some other stuff out there. And also maybe see some Medusa action.
Yeah. Well, if you want to see that Medusa action where I lit things on fire and threw them in the trash, make sure you're following me on Instagram at Glitterlicious Bang Bang. I'm available on Twitter at Glitterlicious, spelled just how it sounds. My Facebook is actually Roni Nicole / Big Bang Nicole, and you can find my YouTube channel at Roni Nicole. And please definitely make sure you check that out. Back in February, in honor of Black History Month, I did something called Sunday Sessions, which spoke with other Black wrestlers about their experience and what it actually means to be a Black wrestler and what we experience in conjunction with our counterparts who are not Black. And so definitely please check that out. Our last Sunday sessions featured Rob Prefontaine and Shane Taylor of Ring of Honor. So I definitely want people to go and check that conversation out. And it's something that is going to be ongoing because I feel like conversations are what help everybody to learn and understand and grow. Find me on Snapchat at Roni Nicole R, and you can email me for bookings, appearances, speaking engagements, and modeling engagements at Roni Nicole R at gmail.com. And Andrew, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to you and your guest and everyone who supports you for seeing me, tuning in, being receptive, and listening to my story. Thank you for sharing our stories because as a podcaster, I know it's challenging. So thank you for all that you're doing on your end as well.
Well, thank you for coming on for starters. And obviously, I like doing interviews with people, and I do interviews across every sector. And so I like talking to a bunch of different wrestlers, voice actors, cosplayers, and other people in the entertainment industry. And I've been saying it to everybody that you have to support indie, no matter what that
Yes.
indie is. Super important. And obviously, financially, that is the way to do it first and
Yep.
foremost, because that does mean the most. It's not the end all be all, It is important, though, especially in the middle of COVID, to do that.
Right.
But if you're in a situation where money's tight and look, things are tough, it's been tough on a lot of people, everybody's in the same boat. Make sure you keep your mortgage paid, your rent paid, electricity on, water. Make sure that your spouse is okay, your girlfriend, your boyfriend's okay. Make sure your parents are okay. Make sure your dog is fed. If you got kids, make sure they are okay, because that is super important as well.
Right.
Um, and if that's the situation, please support on social media because it goes so far and it is
Absolutely.
so important. And also, you'll be informed of what's going on with whoever you're supporting. And so that is something that you definitely have to do if money's tight. But if you have extra money, please go buy merch. Super important. Donations always helpful. Obviously, things like that, as well as following on social media, should just happen anyway. But clearly, those two things are super important. So, on that note, I think that that's a wrap, unless you would like to have a final word.
No, that's totally a wrap. Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I hope that we get to speak again, and I appreciate you so much for what you're doing for the business. Thank you.